and I think what I will do is kind of walk you through some of my experiences that I've seen and how data-driven digital transformations are actually helping organizations be relevant in terms of a digital era. So, from an experience perspective, I am currently managing the entire digital strategy and agenda for Lulu Group. Lulu Group, as such, it's a very known name in the GCC world. We are the largest retailer in the GCC region, which operations in about 12 countries, and I think there are sourcing operations in about 22 countries. We have about 57,000 people working for the group, and we believe that technology is a big enabler in this age, and hence I'm trying to drive and implement digital tools and technologies to keep them abreast of the latest happenings. Prior to joining Lulu, I've been working with retail industry worldwide, so I have experience in working in the US with retailers like Best Buy, Walmart, Target. Worked in the European region with retailers like Tesco, and in India region with retailers like Arvind Group. So I have kind of a diverse experience working with fashion retailers, working with grocery retailers, working with retailers worldwide from Far East till the US. What I will do is I will kind of I've seen a lot of transformations across in the last 22 years of my work experience, and some of the learnings, how organizations are changing, is something that I would kind of present here. As was mentioned, I would recommend that we keep 10 minutes at the end for question and answers. But I would be happy if you can keep on typing the question and answers as you feel, because otherwise, if you just wait till then, maybe you will forget the context. So if you feel that you are willing to ask a question, please do type in, and we'll take it at the last 10 minutes of it. With that, can we start or?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you. And so if you see from the slide, this is a territory where we believe it has to be treated with caution. Yeah, there is deep water. And why I say this is data-driven enterprise or data-driven decision making has been talked about for about 2 decades now. Thomas Davenport famously kind of brought this subject, saying that data and analytics are going to be the key drivers for organization change and tools of competitive advantage. And while he has said it about 20 years back, we are seeing organizations are still kind of trying to put in data-driven decision making and still evolving. I'm not saying it is not there, but I think from a journey perspective, in 20 years, a lot has been achieved. But I think there's still a lot which can be achieved, and the power of data can be used as part of digital transformation. So the famous quote saying that data is the new oil. We are sitting on explosion of data. As we have seen, every part of our life is now revolving around data. So if you see how organizations are trying to understand their own data sets as well as the external data sets. So it is not only the enterprise data which is relevant in today's context, but also the external data. So you need to understand your suppliers, you need to understand your customers, you need to understand environment data, you need to have a lot of space related data if you're in that industry. And so data is kind of flowing from all over the place. Yeah, and as you can see, the amount of data that is being generated is humongous. Yeah, there's no rocket science to understand that data is relevant in today's context, which I think is understood by most CEOs. But how to use that is where the trick and the challenge lies. So what I will do is kind of walk you through some of the steps, some of the activities which enterprises can adopt to go into this kind of a data-driven decision making. So Here is a belief, and I think I like this a lot, uh, in terms of saying that data is the new oil. While that was true, but I think the more relevant context, because oil would mean it would be giving energy, it would be giving so-called kind of lubrication for all the processes. But the other part of data is to be data native, and that is where this term becomes so much more relevant, that data is the new soil. And this to me always has been a really great way of explaining how, if you want to do any kind of nurturing of your enterprise processes, enterprise technologies, you need to ensure that you have this new soil in your enterprise. Until unless you have built that, you will not be able to drive that. And I will give you a context around uh, in the retail that I see, and I've seen retail industry evolve. So retail industry in the beginning was predominantly around bringing a lot of product, putting in the right place so that people can come and buy. That was the concept of retail, and still is. And I think the physical presence will continue. But what has happened is the amount of uh, power that the customer is now holding is humongous, and so the power of retailing is moving away from the retailer, which is sourcing a lot of products, which are trying to build a large physical supply chain network, and the power is suddenly moved to the consumer. And when I say consumer, the consumer has a lot of information, so there is transparency of prices, there is transparency of kind of social data which is out there, which helps product discovery so much more easier. And so discovery becomes so much more outside the so-called physical retail context, and that is all built on data. Yeah, product discovery using personalization, using your behavior, is all about nurturing data. And so what organization need to move is move from this product oriented model towards this experiential model, wherein you create an experience with the use of data, so that they are able to get a very very good experience out of the whole thing. And so you need to, as an enterprise, need to not look at data as just a tool for action, but you need to make sure that your enterprise is actually sitting on this new soil, and you build your processes, your SOPs, your ways of working on this new soil, so that you're able to deliver to the customers better. And so this is the person, Thomas Davenport, who predominantly wrote a book saying how data analytics, about 2 decades back, about how data analytics will become one of the key determinant for organizations to be relevant in this century. Yeah, it is no rocket science. Everybody believes it. The CEOs and the board understand that data is important. But 19 years later, he published this article in Harvard Business Review, saying that companies are failing in their effort to become data driven. Now, this if you this article is available, I would encourage everyone to go and read this. Although it was pre-COVID, but it is still relevant in today's context as to why, after 20 years, when everyone believes that data driven is the way forward, data is the new oil, data is the new soil, you need to put everything around data. Still, a lot of companies are not in the position to become data driven. Still, a lot of broken silos are there, and so enterprises are not able to move fast. There are 2 or 3 signs that I would kind of watch out for. The first sign is, if the organization is still having a very siloed approach towards its functioning and operations, you are not a data driven company, because data is fungible. Yeah, it should be not saying that I have a lot of marketing data, I have a lot of supply chain data, I have a lot of customer data, and everybody looks at data from their own lens. Now that is not being data driven organization. Data driven organizations is something else, and we'll kind of talk about that. And that is because of the legacy structures, legacy applications, and legacy thought process that is out there. While everyone is believing that data driven is the way forward, but the so-called silos in the enterprise are not allowing them to become data driven, which I think is something that we'll talk about. How do you go around that? So uh, while I don't want to paint a very gloomy picture, but uh, if surveys were done, it is very clearly evident that organizations are not even using 10% of their data which is available in the enterprise. And so the scope of extending that is huge. And it is not about tools. Again, let me be very clear. Data driven enterprises is not about implementing an analytics tool or implementing an analytics solution that will uh, kind of enable that journey, but it is a much bigger and a wider concept which I think enterprises need to learn and understand. So the first step towards becoming a data driven organization is to create a data culture. Yeah. And so as we know, everything starts with human beings and their culture and their sensitivity around it. So what is the data culture that you need to build? It is a culture that understands, appreciates, decides, and acts on data much of the time. Yeah, it is not that every time you just need to rely on data and people will not be able to take any decision. That is not the case. But most of your decision making, most of your analysis and understanding of use cases has to be around use of data. Yeah. So that is to me one of the biggest sign that you need to look at. So really hard to be good at data management, analytics, and AI. And so it is not to say that intuition, experience, and kind of collective wisdom is not needed, but it predominantly is enabling those kind of decisions with a lot of data. Yeah, data culture takes place not only at operational level but also at strategic level. And that when you try to do that across the hierarchy, when you try to do that across the functions, that is truly when you have actually created a data culture within the enterprise. So how do you go about doing this? Yeah. And to me this is a kind of a rough four pillar structure that I felt is very relevant. Yeah. And the first two parts, if you see, are more cultural in context, which is around how do you create a mindset around data. And this is the biggest block and barrier. Now it has to do with the second piece, which is if you don't have the skills. So for example, if somebody has been doing a very mundane job in which most of the actions were led by the system. Yeah. And then you are supposed to just do a lot of, I'm talking more from an operational perspective. So if somebody was saying that the system generates some amount of let's say product forecast, and your job was to kind of look at that forecast, approve it, disapprove it, approve it, disapprove it based on a set of criteria, then your ability to think about the various patterns of data and the skills around that will be missing. So the mindset and the skills go hand in hand. Yeah, if you have the skills and the right mindset, you will be able to kind of deliver a kind of a data driven culture within your enterprise. And to me those are very important aspects which needs to be looked at until unless you are able to create the new age skills, because the new age analysis of data and the kind of tool sets which are there around that is very different from what we had seen in the past. So first, make sure that data driven mindset is set across the levels. It is not having barriers within the enterprise, and then you are able to skill people all across. Now if some of the CIOs and CEOs that I speak to, they typically ask, shall we wait for all the people to get skilled then only start our journey? Absolutely not. That is not the way to go ahead. The way to go ahead is, not everybody in the organization will be at the right place around data driven culture on day one. So you need to identify small pockets where this data driven mindset, data driven skills are more relevant. uh, Look for those pockets ask them to be leaders in terms of implementing that change, and then use those case studies to kind of take it to other people or other parts of the organization where the challenge around the use of data is high. And once you see this cross pollination of case studies, cross pollination of ideas, you will be able to drive that discussion much better. So try to build this first, then look at the other part. Obviously both of them have to go hand in hand and parallel. And one of the question that most of the organizations, if you go and speak to the CXO community, non-technical CXO community, they would say we don't have enough data. While statistics shows that we use only 10% of data, but a lot of CXO and a lot of business folks say that we don't have data. So make sure that you are creating uh, data sets which are much more democratized in nature. Yeah, don't try to make rigid and difficult applications which are not very easy to use. So try to create and make those tool sets. And it is not about creating a visualization layer. Yeah, you need to create the data set which is so much more easy. So we will talk about some of the steps that you need to go through as a part of this journey. But what happens is, I've seen in most of the cases, when we talk about data, people talk about using some amount of visualization tool and then trying to make sense out of that. Now that is important, but try to make sure that you have a data platform which is available. Now what is a data platform? A data platform is a platform which enables democratization of the data, the ease of availability of data, and then you use that with the right mindset and the skill set which we talked about building. And if the data accessibility easy, the tools are very simple, then your ability to deliver that change is much higher. So make sure that they don't become monolith applications like let's say the legacy ERP applications which a lot of organizations have. It is very difficult to change, right? Don't get into those traps. Make sure that they are all built on modern data platform technologies, which is kind of very easily available in today's context, and then you continue to do that. So the question that most of the CXOs will have is, so what that journey looks like. And I'll give you a little bit of a context from a uh, maybe at a conceptual level, from a product level. In the the later part of last century, in the 80s and the 90s, uh, the big buzz was business intelligence. Yeah, they used to have a term called BI. That is when the BI was brought in, and it predominantly wanted to build a ETL layer on the data sets which are there. Yeah, ETL layers were predominantly put. They were a monolith on a monolith. Yeah, which means that ETL layer was a huge piece which was not very easy to change. It used to run in batch mode, and then you predominantly, but it served the purpose. But because uh, ability to kind of access that data from those legacy applications was so very difficult, and hence it was nicely done, saying that let us do that abstraction layer in which we can do an ETL on top of the legacy applications, and then create data marts. And those data marts were then used to create not so great but a lot of BI reports, and that was the data warehouse. And so I can from my experience I can say that a large part of the enterprise today is still hooked on to this kind of a model. Yeah, in which they still have legacy ETL layers, legacy business warehouses, data warehouses which are out there, and then they have very custom reporting solutions on top of it, which makes the entire journey so much more difficult. Because what happens is, in that context, there would be a BI team which would then look at batch mode of processing of data into those data marts, and then those reports would be static, and the business users will not be able to change that on the fly. And that these are some of the limitations of that era. uh, I'm pretty sure a lot of organizations are still in that mode. in which you are running large data warehouses which are not able to process huge amounts of data in real time basis. You would be giving a lot of reports to your business users which are still struggling to understand and change that, because it takes a lot of time for changing stuff like that. So that was the last part of last century. Then obviously in the early part of this century, new technologies came in, and there was coexistence between the so-called legacy data warehousing solutions with with kind of modern technologies, and that is when the Hadoops, the Cassandras of the world, they started the journey, and from there on, I think things have moved on quite a bit, in which you are able to now consume data at a much faster pace than you would have done in the data warehouse phase. You're starting to see, and so there are pockets of enterprises which are now relying on this new modern data pipelines which are out there. And to me, that is the transition that every organization needs to go through. There is no, my word of caution would be that there is no need to rip apart everything of the ETL and the traditional data warehouse which is out there. Take small steps, keep on moving it to the new data pipeline, and that is a journey in itself. And this is the most difficult part of this transition. So, how can you move from the traditional data warehousing paradigm to a much modern data pipeline? And what modern data pipeline? Two or three things that you need to watch out for is that it has to be dealing with huge amount of data. B, the processing of that data has to be near real time. Yeah, I cannot say everything has to be absolutely real time, but it has to be near real time, and that pipeline has to be cloud enabled. Yeah, there is no reason for building legacy applications, and the reason is that the downstream applications that you want out of that data set has to be cloud native. Yeah, then only you will get the power of creating those data platforms on for your enterprises. And large amount of data, very easy in terms of pipeline, and the power actually moves on from the technology team to the users. And so obviously there are partners who are there as part of this event, who have actually democratized that use and power of visualizing data. Yeah, visualization is the last part of it, but it's very important, because once you start visualizing, you see the story behind the data, and that is where the whole fun begins. So make sure that you are able to democratize that use of that data. You have very nimble and flexible systems, and it is all happening at large scale in real time basis, and that is what the middle part is. And the last 10 years, that transition is happening. Once you've done that, you predominantly are what we call it the modern data driven enterprise looks like, in which you have multiple pipelines which are all running and processing data on a real time basis, using streaming technologies and a lot of analytics and machine learning which are built on top of it. Now, a lot of people kind of start their so-called AI journey before they have built this, and that is where the kind of fallbacks are happening. In which, if you put your AI and ML journeys before you have built a real modern real-time data platforms within the enterprise, you will not be able to succeed. And hence, I tell a lot of the CIOs and the CEOs that I kind of interact, to say that, guys, if you really want to get the value of AI and ML, you need to invest first in the data technologies which are out there. Make sure that your data technologies are modern. Make sure you have enough streaming data, enough modern data pipelines which are built already in your enterprise, so that you are able to deliver the right value uh, out of your AI and machine learning out there. So, if we were to kind of look at what kinds of kind of transition that you need to look at, again, most of the enterprises start with something called as a point solution. So for example, if somebody says, I don't have a lot of data which is available, so start with any point solution. Let's say I'll give you a context of retail or banking. Start with the customer solution, yeah, and then try to build that story around that point solution. Then you start aggregating that with your backend, and then try to marry it, and then you predominantly move into a kind of a enterprise grade data platform which is out there. So it is a journey. Data driven decision making is a transition, is a transformation. Your digital transformation need to be pivoted around, because data is the new soil. It has to be pivoted around building data platforms which are out there. And once you go through that journey, you will see that large part of your enterprise. We talked about what is true data driven culture within the enterprise. One is your enterprise, large part or most of the decision makings in your enterprise are enabled with data, and you have unlimited power of presenting that data in front of your business and the stakeholders. So with that, I think I come to the end of my presentation. I hope that we are able to make some sense out of this. It is a journey. So if I were to just summarize, it is a journey. It has to be led with change management, where by creating a different mindset, a different skill set, and then it has to be enabled. And let me put this word very specifically. Don't start building a large data platform exercise without buying from a business, because until unless business is leading those kind of transformations, you will not be able to get value out of it. It is not a technology transformation. It is a kind of a cultural transformation which every organization needs to go through, and make it a journey, and you will be able to see wonders out of the data which is there in your enterprise. So that is more or less what I wanted to cover. Thank you so much, and we can take some
Thanks.
questions.
Thanks a lot. So I appreciate if you stop sharing the screen so that you can see the questions easier. If you
Sure.
if you agree with me, thank you so much. So now you can see on the chat area on the right, Edward from Meyer Foods. Each will have a copy of this and a full deck. Edward.
Yeah, I think this is data which can be shared. There is no propriety on that. I've seen it as a journey, and then I would love to share it, and just make sure that you give me some feedback whether it made sense or not.
Thanks a lot. So, Edward, if you have extra comments, you can write it still. Another question from Sunduta from Visa Middle East. The base of data lake and lake house is the same form of data. How do we actually differentiate on the utility of both?
So it is predominantly a journey. Data lakes can be built on pockets of data, whereas lake house is predominantly when you have achieved that journey, when you have completed that thing, then you are able to use that with the power of AI, with the power of ML, and you are able to do that. So it's more conceptual in nature, in terms of showing that it is moving from your legacy applications, and then you will have hybrid solutions. Data lakes can be with both legacy plus your modern pipelines, and lakehouse is predominantly when you have completely done away with your legacy pipelines which are out there. So that is more or less a visual representation of what was shown earlier.
Thanks a lot. Another question from Mihir. What was the toughest part of the transformation that you personally saw in your experience?
Toughest part is people. Yeah, the biggest impediment towards this is the mindset. And if you saw the 4 pillars which are out there, everything else can be built, but it is the mindset. So I'll give you a few examples what I mean by that. If there were people with legacy mindsets, what they would assume that I don't know how to use data, you tell me everything which you can visualize out of that data. Yeah, and people would expect either a technology team or a data analytics team to predominantly provide that that information. Now, this to me is a very, very clear sign that your enterprise is not ready in terms of creating a data driven mindset, which is out there. And so, the toughest to me is having that skill and having that mindset. Until unless you are able to drive that, you will be still kind of looking it as a technology implementation and not able to get a real value out of it.
Thanks a lot. The last question we can manage, though there are two questions. So Pradeep from Dubai Islamic Insurance. Is a digital data maturity assessment needed before any transformation is undertaken? Did you have to do or lead it at any organization you have worked in? Say even Lulu.
It is good to have a kind of a starting point, yeah, and that is where if you don't have it as a part of your strategy, and you kind of go all over the place in terms of creating and buying, and that is what is happening in today's context is people are going, and so marketing guys will go and buy a marketing analytics solution, supply chain guys will buy and go and buy a supply chain analytics solution, and there is no clear strategy around data, yeah, and this is where things start falling, and again you will kind of create pockets of analytics capability which they don't talk to each other. And one of the things is there is no large assessment as such which is needed, but if you are able to say that I have enterprises wherein you need to collaborate across the functions and then create a common data set so that you are able to use it to the benefit of the for the enterprise, that to me is the assessment that can be done.